Well, it's a Thursday, and when it comes to Thursday, you know what we're discussing? We're discussing economic development and what is your role in the development of this country. Thursday, specifically, we earmarked it for discussing the economy of this country and also the economy that involves the private sector, the role of government, and what you as a Ugandan is doing to ensure that you participate on, or rather contribute on the GDP. And my name is Dalton Kawesa, here today to have a discussion on the strategies by the government to ensure that the development of private sector. Welcome aboard this segment of the topical discussion. And with me in studio, I'll be speaking to Mr. Joseph Enyim. I hope I got the pronunciation right. He's the acting commissioner in charge of economic development, policy and research from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning, and Thank you for having me.
Yes, let's dive into the discussion about development. But before we go into the strategies, there's a lot of confusion around growth and the development of the country. And people have said that we have achieved growth, but when you look at the individuals, the development is lacking. Generally speaking, without being very specific, what should people pay attention when we're speaking about the growth and the development of this country?
Okay, thank you. So the two concepts of growth and development are very related, but they are distinct. Growth is a necessary condition for development, but it is not a sufficient condition. Development speaks about outcomes in the quality of life and generally the character of an economy, while growth speaks to the process by which the production of goods and services increases in an economy. And so when we focus on economic management, we pay interest to both parameters. Because for the quality of an individual's life to improve, they need to be able to enjoy, if you take it, incomes, they must be able to generate an income. Secondly, they have to be able to effectively participate in the life of that economy. That means they have to have attained a certain level of literacy, and then also the quality of their life. They have to be able to live long. So internationally, we rely on what they call the Human Development Index as an indicator really of development, which tells us how those three parameters are performing.
All right. Thank you for at least enlightening the world about this, because often you've had countries say this, we have developed this better infrastructure. Let's come to now zero down to the strategies. Your ministry came up with two strategies to help the growth of private sector. Yes? And I want to ask, how are these strategies positioning private sector in order to accelerate economic development?
Okay, before I address myself specifically to the strategies, because the strategies sit within a broader context. You're familiar that under the administration of the NRM government, we are building an independent, integrated and self-sustaining economy. Now what that means is we are on an agenda, there's a threefold agenda that we are delivering. One, government is out to achieve full monetization of the economy, making sure that all households are able to participate in the monetized segment of the economy. Number two is to achieve full formalization of the economy, to ensure that enterprises and individuals are engaged in formal activities. And then number three is to achieve full employment of all the factors of production. And that includes land, labor, capital, technology, And depending on your school of economics, we now also have entrepreneurship. So those 5 factors. And when you combine them very well, you come to something we call a competitive economy. And it is in the quest to deliver those 3 things: full monetization, full formalization, and full employment in the economy, that we have been able, under the leadership of the president, to put together what is now you are aware of as the 10-fold growth strategy. Now, in an economy like Uganda, we have chosen to be a private sector-led economy and also an export-oriented economy. And that means that the private sector is the engine of this economy. And we put together these strategies to facilitate the development of that private sector. How do you know that a private sector is developed? There are a couple of parameters that we look at in that process. One, certainly you look at the share of the contribution of the private sector in GDP. In the case of Uganda, it's significant, because about 80% of the goods and services we produce in this country are delivered by the private sector. You also look at things like savings to GDP. These individuals and companies, from the incomes they earn, what are they able to put aside? And of course, what you put aside is what you ultimately invest. So in Uganda, we've been seeing private sector growth as measured by savings to GDP improving. As we stand today, 20% of our GDP. Savings stand at 20% of GDP. The other thing you look at, if the private sector is healthy and growing, it translates into a reduction in poverty, because it means that economic opportunities are expanding, and they're expanding in such a way that more people are able to benefit.
So in terms of, if you called a measurable impact, yes, would you be very specific and say this, in terms of the strategies that you people aligned, yes, this, in terms of jobs, in terms of maybe access to capital, this is what we have been able to achieve for this, because the strategy is ending in 2020, then the second strategy is ending in the next financial year, if I may be right?
Yes, you're correct. So we set out with the first strategy as giving you a context, because like I said, the private sector is a player, but it plays within a context. And so under the first strategy, which was delivered to coincide with the period of the third National Development Plan, it ran, of course, from the plan running from 2020 to 2021. So we aim to contribute to the full monetization of the economy, and that's the theme that we ran with. So under that strategy, some of the major achievements we registered was we witnessed the return in investment in Uganda increase by 2 percentage points from an average of 12% to 14%. And as you know, private capital looks for areas where there is higher return on investment. And the second thing that we witnessed is a rebound in foreign direct investment inflows into the country during that period. We've also witnessed during the same period an increasing share of credit going into the agricultural sector, which is where the majority of the people are employed. And of course, that also drives our agro-industrialization agenda. So the strategy set out essentially to be able to coordinate and consolidate the different private sector interventions across the 20 NDP3 programs. We are implementing in Uganda under the NDP3 program-based planning and budgeting. The idea is that we have to operate as a whole of government and a whole of society to grow this private sector. And every program of government has a role to play. And so the strategy essentially looks into who is supposed to do what under which program, and to make sure that their actions are coordinated. We have goal consensus in the way that we
So could you elaborate on the composition of the private sector and certainly their development, their contribution to the economic development
of Uganda?
Yes.
So the private sector in Uganda is characterized by a number of parameters. One, when we look at the structure of a private sector in Uganda, we draw a line on how many actors are in the formal sector, how many are in the informal sector. So currently, about 53% of our GDP comes from the informal sector. That's nearly half of our private, of GDP being informal. The other one is the level of informality. We have, from the latest indicators, we still see that a lot of our private sector operates in the informal sector. As a matter of fact, 9 out of 10 jobs of people who are working in Uganda come from the private sector. Okay. The other thing we look at, like I said, is monetized GDP. What share of the private sector, these are households, and the corresponding GDP is able to engage in the transaction of goods and services that is supported by, you know, the medium of currency.
We shall come back to that when you talk about monetization of GDP. My other thing would be there's a tendency when you talk about private sector and it's driving the economy, there's a tendency to think private sector, it's industries. Leaving out the cottage part of it. Yes? Are you, in your strategy, are you alive to this?
We are very alive to this. Essentially, if you look at the private sector, there are two major entities. They are households, and then there are the firms, F-I-R-M, the entities that use these inputs, whether it is labor, capital, land, combine them to produce goods and services. So in discussing Uganda's private sector, we look at those two players because the labor is very critical. It is what provides what we call demand, effective demand for the goods and services that the industries produce. If you leave aside the fact that we have to export. And so when their incomes are rising, it means their disposable income also increases. They provide demand. And that's what people look for, market, before you set up your farm. So where am I going to sell my product? Where am I going to sell my service? So yes, the spectrum does include households and farms. So when it comes to farms, what you're calling maybe the factories and the rest, they are not the same. They are also further divided. We have what we call micro, we have what we call small, medium, and then of course you have the large enterprises in an economy. So the answer to your question is yes, we look at all those three, both in the urban and in the rural area. And that is the spectrum, really, of the private sector we are talking about.
For the bulk of Ugandans, because when you talk about the strategies, full employment, monetization, and etc.
Yeah.
Let me just look at employment, full employment. The bulk of Ugandans are actually employed by the cottage industries. And that's why I want to peg it to the previous question that I asked. I want it to make sense to someone who's running a business, yes, in Natete, in Chiriandongo, yes, a small business, some small industry, the cottage industry, someone in let's say in Amurata, yes. How do they fit into this strategy, the strategy that Minister of Finance came up with?
So, really, regardless of where this entity is located, the fact that you are focusing on the cottage industry I think what is critical to understand is that every enterprise is interested in making a profit. You are in that activity to generate revenue, and you want to generate revenue in such a way that you are able to make a margin. And so what the strategy addresses itself to, number one, is how do you tap into opportunities that exist? One, for you to tap into opportunities that exist, you must be recognizable. Okay? For example, if there is money available for you to access capital, government has directed significant resources through UDB, PDM, EMIOGA, and other schemes for the benefit of these enterprises. Now, for you to access this money, you must be recognizable, meaning that you must be formal. We encourage that these enterprises are able to register the business with Uganda Business Registration Services, so that you have a recognizable name. You are able to approach a bank and say, this is my enterprise. And that opens opportunities for you, number one. Number two, we are also saying that whatever you produce must have a market. And so the strategy aims at facilitating access to export markets. Domestically here, we are supporting BUBU, Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. So making sure that local content in the economy is growing, that the large farms are able to source their inputs, the supply chain that feeds into these large farms creates opportunities for people down the chain and beyond. And so if you are producing cassava, for example, you need somebody who is processing ethanol to provide the offtake of that cassava. And if those factories are growing, the demand for ethanol is rising, then you find that even you who's operating a cassava mill down in Soroti or Katakwi or Lango, you're able to produce knowing that there is somebody going to take this out. The other thing about making a profit is you have to lower your cost of production. And when we look at the indicators, some of the things that are...
How is that possible?
Lowering the cost of production. The evidence we have shows that about 70% of costs that affect the production by large farms are attributed to three things. Number one, energy. Number two is transport. And then capital and logistics. So by lowering costs, government is improving the ease with which enterprises can connect from their production centers to the markets.
No, just right there.
Yes.
Just right there. You've helped us come home. You have a strategy.
Yep.
The president has highlighted three bottlenecks to economic development. The president has said the cost of money. The president has said the cost of transport. The president has also said the cost of electricity. Something that is a bottleneck to this development.
Yes.
I want from the perspective of a Minister of Finance, how are you helping, especially the bulk of Ugandans that are more empowered in the cottage industry than these big firms, to ensure that they address this in your strategy, the bottleneck said by the president?
Okay, so the cost, let's start with the cost of capital. The price of capital is driven by certain parameters.
Oh, correct.
Including risk.
Correct.
If I'm going to lend to you, how risky are you? I must price that risk in the credit that I extend to you. So in the strategy, we focus on de-risking the economy. How are we de-risking the economy? Number one, by making sure that the factors that drive interest rate up, for example, inflation. If inflation is rising, the banks have to factor that in the way that they price in order to make a net gain as they lend to you. Number two, in the case of where a majority of Ugandan people and farms are, We know that this is agriculture. Two of the biggest risks there are really climate shocks, weather-related shocks. It could be drought or floods. And so government is working to de-risk that area by making sure that we provide water for production, we extend information on rain patterns, but also to make sure that diseases and pests do not affect the harvest or the and the return from people's efforts in these farms. We're investing in.
Allow me come in there.
Yeah.
You've just tried to address the one of the bottlenecks, and that of course the cost of money or the capital. And some of the things we've seen government try to, many people rush to the commercial banks in order to facilitate their businesses. In response, government has done has invested about 80 billion into UDB, such that people access that. Am I right?
Correct.
Yes.
In this last financial year.
Yes, the last
cumulatively, it's now about 1.6 trillion.
Okay, last financial year specifically. Do you think that money, with the struggles that actually we've had people going through to get access to that money, do you think it fits well into your strategy in ensuring that private sector development is propelled?
It fits very well because within the private sector, like we discussed earlier, the chain has different characters of players. They are the households, first of all. You have the micro, small, medium, and then the large enterprises. So the resources that government has invested through UDB caters to a particular segment of the private sector. The medium enterprises and then the large corporations. These are the main aggregators and off-takers, and they also have the ability to engage with the export markets. And within the segment of the households and micro enterprises, that's where we have a lot of informal enterprises. And that's where the elements of PDM and EMIOGA come in. PDM, of course, targeting agricultural activities, households in this, and then EMIOGA targeting people who are in trade skills. The skills, they have like a skill in their hand. They can do something. You know, I can tailor, I can, I'm a carpenter, I can do something with my hands. So the idea here is that as you grow from the lower segment, you're able to formalize and then, of course, tap into the other larger pools of money. And in partnership with the commercial banks, also you are aware we have the agricultural credit facility. And that has been a very outstanding success. We now see that lending under it is soon crossing the 1 trillion mark. Over 4,000 enterprises are supported.
Isn't it your interest that you increase the revenues, the money that is given like to UDB, in order for private sector to access more cheaper capital?
Yes, it is in the interest of government, but as you are aware, government only accounts for about 20% of GDP, government spending. So the idea here is that there is a lot of money with the private sector, whether it is your savings or foreign direct investment that comes from abroad. The question now is, how do we incentivize you to make those savings available and in a form that is accessible for those who want to invest?
Good question.
Yes.
How do we incentivize the private sector? Let me give you some numbers. Let's look, and these numbers coming from the second bottleneck, that is the cost, the power, that has been highlighted by the president. The cottage industry consumes, or domestic consumption is about 28%. But their contribution to the GDP is 30%. How do you incentivize that sector to ensure that they contribute more than 30%?
So if we focus on the area of energy, first of all, we have very good news.
Okay.
If you look at the data coming out from UMEME and the Electricity Regulatory Authority, Between 2022 and 2023, you know, peak demand for energy in Uganda grew at a rate of about 17%. And as you know, 70% of demand for energy in Uganda, electricity, is accounted for by industrial players.
Yes.
You know,
Which
how
are segmented.
they are segmented.
And I've showed you the contribution vis-a-vis the consumption.
Yes. So within that 70%, we notice that the medium enterprises and the kind of enterprises you're talking about actually don't fit in that segment. They fit in what we call commercial demand.
Okay.
Because that is about you could say maybe 20%, because some of them are either as households and others are also enterprises. And so the idea is that through initiatives like rural electrification, extending electricity to trading centers, we are able to improve the production processes of those people in the cottage industry. If you're making groundnut paste, if you are drying cassava, you don't consume as much energy as an established player, maybe in the iron and steel industry. So the idea here is that, one, you help them pool together because it's easier to extend power when they are concentrated. Number two is to make cheaper energy available. And that's why government is working to lower the cost, the unit cost of energy.
Okay. Let's go for a break, and we have looked at the access. The access, he has discussed the access of energy, but also the cost. We're trying to find out how the cost can be reduced in order to address this bottleneck, as said by the president. But when we return also, we're also looking at the bottleneck of the transport, the freight, to see how the strategies of Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning fit into those. My name is Dalton Kawesa. Stay here. It's a good morning from the Political Command Center. My name is Dalton Kawesa, and I said on Thursdays we delve into the economics of this country, see the pattern, see the development, track the strategies as been highlighted by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, but also look at the politics of these strategies. Are they political in nature, or they are strategies that are meant to catapult this country into another level or grow its GDP? We've been discussing some of the strategies that have been put in place, the two big strategies that have been put in place by the Ministry of Finance, but also alive to the bottlenecks that were highlighted by the president. The president speaks about them, that they need, if we address these bottlenecks, then Uganda will move into the middle income status. With me, Yam from as the acting commissioner in charge of economic development policy and research. And has been laboring to explain some of the strategies that are being enforced, and also addressing the challenges that come with the bottlenecks that have been said by the president. We have looked at the cost of money. We have looked at the cost of electricity. You highlighted about accessibility. That's a good news that is coming near. But I wanted you to also elaborate more on how is the deliberate policy to ensure that there is a reduction in the cost of power, such that when the reduction in the cost of power definitely plays out in the reduction in the cost of production, the goods will be sold cheaply, and consumption thereby growth.
All right, with those two areas covered, when it comes to the aspect of transport, there are two dimensions to this. As you know, Uganda is a land-linked country, and we rely a lot on currently the road transport to access the coast. And so the unit cost of moving this containerized cargo by road is typically much higher compared to other modes of transport. And so the strategy of government is to lower the unit cost of moving containerized cargo between major trading hubs like Kampala or other upcoming industrial areas to the coast. And through this, we are targeting two main areas. One is the rail network, and two is water transport on Lake Victoria. On the rail network, we have commenced work on the standard gauge railway from Malaba to Kampala, that segment. And then we are focusing on rehabilitation of the meter gauge railway, both the Malaba and Kampala segment, but also Tororo Gulu segment, so that more cargo moves off the road onto rail. And we are also working on developing the ports, Port Bukasa, and the navigability of vessels on Lake Victoria, so that we move some of our cargo to come via water. That is the first dimension. You could call it the national dimension. But as you know, before goods reach Kampala or they are consolidated for export, they have to go through rural communities. And so we also have a very strong focus on community access roads, making sure they are motorable by maintaining them. And so through the District Urban and Community Access Road Program, government has increased investment. Last year, we provided 1 billion shillings per local government to be able to maintain these roads, and we are sustaining that investment. In addition, of course, to the work that we are doing on national roads. Okay. And then the third element is just to improve traffic flow around Kampala. We are investing massively in upgrading and renovating the roads around Kampala, because traffic jam costs a lot for the business community.
Will you speak to the achievements of these strategies?
Yes, the main achievements of the strategies, you could measure them still at national level, but also at farm level. So under these strategies, for example, we have seen Uganda deliver very high per capita GDP growth. So we've seen that on account of the vibrancy of the private sector, the economy has been growing. Under the two plans of NDP 1 and 2, wherein the national...
Maybe to guide this in terms of achievement, can we look at achievement in terms of FDI, multi-sectorial growth? Can also look at what I would call in terms of the vision itself, maybe the job creation. Let's look at those two first.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that for all those to happen, there are levels of reflection. First is the growth of the overall economy. And we are saying we've been able to register an average of about 5% GDP growth during this period of the plan. Last year we delivered at 6%. Now, what has driven that growth?
Are we, before you go to the drivers, are we looking at the export growth? Can you be able to speak to the export growth specifically, such that someone says, okay, the strategy is actually working?
Yes. So that growth has been driven, one, by exports. We are seeing our exports performing very well. In the last year, we were able to deliver export growth of over 40%. These are merchandise exports. The other thing that this strategy has been able to deliver is to mobilize foreign direct investment. We've seen foreign direct investment cross the $3 billion mark. And Uganda...
Can you say that again?
$3 billion mark. Yes, we bounced back. We are now the best FDI destination, both in East Africa, but also in Africa. Uganda was voted last year as the best investment destination on the continent. Number 3 is we are seeing, like I said, access to credit. Credit to the agricultural sector, private sector credit, has risen by 2 percentage points from about 11 to 13% of total private sector credit. Okay. And we are also seeing, like I said, the ability of households to save and workers. Last year, if you followed the results of the National Social Security Fund, NSSF, when they released, they also registered another very significant milestone with membership crossing 3 million people. And that cannot be possible if jobs are not being created. Today, as we discuss, NSSF is releasing its latest results, and we're looking forward to the new numbers. We also see growth in the payee register from URA. As you know, pay-as-you-earn income taxes are now our best performing tax head, both due to a growth in numbers of people with formal jobs, but also due to higher income earnings.
I've heard that this strategy has suffered in the area of sectoral diversification. Is that true?
Yes and no. Broadly, when you look at the structure of our GDP, services commands the leading share, followed by industry, which averages now about maybe 26%, and then you have agriculture at 24%. And so government is pursuing the agenda of structural transformation, and within that, of course, to deliver socio-economic transformation. That means we are working to move more labor from activities and sectors of low productivity to those of higher productivity. We want to see more people moving into manufacturing and releasing the land for agriculture. And during the period of this strategy, we saw that the share of industry actually improved from about 24% to 16%. And when you also look at manufacturing within GDP, we are performing now at over 15% of GDP is accounted for by the manufacturing sector, up from about 10%. So that shows you that this transformation is happening, and that is on the side of yes. Where there is concern is on the issue of labor productivity. Because as we implement this strategy, the population is growing. And so what we are seeing is that the availability of land is not matching the growth rate of the population. So agricultural productivity, which is actually the yield or output per worker, has been on a decline. That means we need to improve the skill set of people who are farming, the ability to use modern farm inputs and methods, and agronomy to raise.
It's not easy to maintain the growth momentum amidst global waves, or what maybe I can say global shocks, like inflation. How are you answering those critical issues to ensure that you stay afloat in this strategy?
That's a very good context, because Uganda operates within a global context. And so some of the major shocks that we have encountered during this strategy are largely, you could say there are three. One has been the global surge in inflation. Number two, of course, was COVID. This strategy was one ran through the period of COVID, and we saw a global slowdown. And then three has been the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, but also in Europe, that affected global supply chains. So in the case of Uganda, and maybe this takes us to this issue of coordination, the ministry has been very deliberate in coordinating fiscal and monetary policy. And the result of that is Uganda has now the best inflation rate within the East African region. We've been able to contain the rise in inflation, best really within.
Is that in answer to the global inflation and also the supply chain disruptions that we continue to see? Largely the effect of the global inflation,
yes, but correctly also with the supply chain, because if you don't...
Can you speak to specifics of how you've addressed the supply chain, for instance?
So the supply chain is, of course, like we said, constrained by the players within that chain. One, they must be able to produce with the benefit of access to capital. Takes us back to the other points. Supply chain issues include availability of inputs, critical inputs, making sure that those are available. So by focusing on the idea of strengthening local content, you find that a number of these producers have been able to source a growing share of their inputs locally, and that insulates them from shocks in the global supply chain. The other area where we've seen the strategy of the ministry work is in maintaining the exchange, supporting the monetary authorities with the exchange rate stability. That's very important because a lot of manufacturing relies on intermediate goods that must be imported. And if your exchange rate is rising rapidly, what happens is that it affects the ability to plan. It raises the risks and raises the cost. And that would affect the profitability of the players there.
Effective coordination from ministries, agencies is very critical in the implementation of these strategies. How have you been managed to align agencies like URA, Bank of Uganda, maybe to improve, to help the private sector in driving an inclusive growth
agenda? So there are a couple of things. One is making sure that we have a common goal. So the ministry has been at the center of rallying players. We have taken lead, for example, now in putting together the 10-fold growth strategy. So we've worked with other MDAs to focus government on our goal during the next 3 development plans. But with respect to the strategy we are looking at, we have largely employed what we call program-based planning and budgeting. And under program-based planning and budgeting, we bring different MDAs to deliver on a common result. And that's why we now allocate money to programs as opposed to specific votes so that they plan along these results. Number 2 is effective stakeholder consultation. We are now holding the National Competitiveness Forum. It's another of our consultative platforms to make sure that we are listening to the private sector and we are responding to their legitimate issues and following through on the MDAs, whether it is standards, whether it is delays in the border posts, to have those addressed. And then the last one is really making sure that economic policy formulation and management is evidence-driven. So reading the feedback from the market and adjusting our policies and actions to support what the markets are telling us.
There's a private sector player, and maybe someone who owns a business, let's say in Atete, or someone who owns a business, let's say in Serere district. He's saying maybe these people are just speaking a lot of English. How does that business owner in Serere fit into this coordination equation that you've just highlighted?
So the way they experience the coordination we are talking about largely is in the quality of public services. So for example, because of coordination, we are now automating and digitizing the operation of government agencies. So whether you are registering a business, whether you are filing your taxes, you are able now to do that online. That means you don't have to travel to the district headquarters or come to URA. If you are filing your annual returns with a URA or just documents with URSB, you can do that online. So that's one level of coordination, making sure that the platforms of government are talking to one another. We have recently completed the one-stop center for businesses at the Uganda Business Facilitation Center. The idea here is bring all these agencies to one place so that when you come to register your investment, you're able to do it in under 2 days.
Well, we are almost running out of time, and it will be definitely asked to leave. Great discussion that we have. But before I say bye to you, Mr. Yam, I want to speak to the National Competitive Forum that is coming up. And when is it coming up? But also, what is the focus of that National Competitive Forum?
So this will be the 15th National Competitiveness Forum, and the ministry will be hosting this forum on 3rd of October at Mestil Hotel. The theme of the forum this year round is the role of the public and private sector in realizing the knowledge economy. Under the tenfold growth strategy that government has adopted, we are focusing on 4 priority areas: agro-industrialization, tourism development, mineral-based development, including oil and gas, and then science, technology, innovation, including ICT. And it is in this area that we deal with the knowledge economy. So the knowledge economy has 2 sides to it. One, we are trying to add value to the traditional economy. And then 2, we are moving, investment to new areas. And the forum will focus on 3 broad, sub-themes. One will be on the pathogen economy, the whole idea of how you take advantage of the research and development agenda to respond to addressing the disease burden and the whole idea of vaccines through the pharmaceutical industry. The second thing we'll be addressing ourselves to during this forum is the issue of e-mobility. We've just been talking about transport. And what we are seeing happening is that globally, there's a transition away from fossil-fueled mobility to clean energy. And Uganda is positioning itself to be a net source of e-mobility within the continent. And then finally, in the knowledge economy, it is innovators that set the pace. So we will be looking at how startups performing, what is there within the economy to support them, and we'll be also taking time to listen to them in terms of what their unique needs are. How do we facilitate the system within which they operate so that they can innovate better and bring solutions to market. So that is broadly what this forum will look at, and we're expecting participation from a range of stakeholders, the private sector chiefly, supported of course by the academia, and also the media. We would like you to tell this story and mobilize the country. We'll have different entities, the Science, Technology, and Innovation Secretariat participating within this forum.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Eyam, for being part of this great show to highlight the two strategies that the Minister of Finance is using in order to push the private sector. It has been a very great discussion. I hope the people out there, especially the private sector, the people we've spoken about, passionate about the cottage industry that runs the bulk of this section, is something that he spoke to with consumption, especially in energy, but also most important is the address of the 3 bottlenecks that the president normally talks about. That is the cost of money, the transport, and also electricity. My name is Dalton Kawesa. Thank you for being part of this business segment on the topical discussion. I remind you, every Thursday, we focus on the economy. Stay here.